They say betrayal cuts the deepest when it comes from the ones you trust the most. But what happens when a man of God, a man of faith, is pushed beyond his breaking point? When the very foundation of his life crumbles beneath him, not by the hands of an enemy, but by the touch of the one he loved most. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens next. When forgiveness isn't enough, when faith begins to rot, and when the man who once preached righteousness becomes something else entirely. Because some wounds don't heal. Some sins don't stay buried. And sometimes, the most dangerous man is the one who was once pure. Pastor Daniel was the kind of man people looked up to. He walked with purpose, spoke with conviction, and carried himself with the quiet strength of someone who had dedicated his life to something greater than himself. He wasn't just a preacher, he was a shepherd, guiding his congregation with wisdom and humility. Every Sunday, his voice rang through the church, steady and sure, reminding the people of faith, of love, of righteousness. And then there was Evelyn, his wife, his partner in everything. A woman of grace, always poised, always kind. She stood beside him, the very picture of devotion, greeting church members with a warm smile, offering comfort to those in need, making sure their home was a sanctuary of peace. If there was ever an example of a godly marriage, it was theirs. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. The church admired them. The elders respected them. Young couples looked up to them as the embodiment of a love built on faith. They prayed together. They served together. They were inseparable. And yet, for all the admiration, for all the whispers of, "That's the kind of marriage I want one day," there were things no one saw. Things that didn't make it into Sunday sermons or warm greetings at the church doors. Because perfection is a story people love to tell. It's easy to believe in. It's comforting. But real life is never that simple. Daniel, for all his devotion, had moments of doubt, moments he never voiced. He had spent years pouring his heart into his ministry, into his congregation, into his marriage. And still, some nights, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling something he couldn't quite name. A restlessness. A silence that stretched too long. And Evelyn, oh, Evelyn was beloved. She was adored. She was the pastor's wife, the shining example. But people don't watch closely enough, do they? They don't pay attention to the little things. The way a smile holds for a second too long before slipping away. The way hands that once reached for each other now only met out of habit. The way words that once held warmth slowly became rehearsed, routine. There was no shouting, no fighting, no great earth-shattering moment that told the world something was wrong. That wasn't their story. Their story was quieter, slower. The kind of story no one notices until it's already over. Because people see what they want to see. A devoted pastor. A graceful wife. A perfect marriage. And yet, perfection never tells the whole story. It should have been an ordinary day. Nothing special, nothing remarkable. Just another Saturday morning, another routine, another moment that should have passed without consequence. Daniel had left early, his mind focused on the church, on the sermon he had been preparing all week. He was looking forward to the meeting, discussing Sunday's message, sharing ideas with fellow pastors, doing the work he had been called to do. But then, a small, simple mistake. A forgotten sermon outline. A document left sitting on his desk, nothing more than an oversight. An inconvenience, really. Nothing to worry about. He would just turn around, head back home, grab it, and be on his way. He barely thought twice about it. But as he pulled into the driveway, something shifted. A feeling, faint at first, like a whisper in the back of his mind. The house stood still, too still. Normally, by this time, Evelyn would be moving around, the soft hum of her voice filling the air, the clatter of dishes, the rhythm of life. But today, silence. Daniel stepped inside, the familiar scent of home wrapping around him, but the warmth he had always known was missing. There was something about the quiet that made him pause, something about the way the air felt heavier, the way the walls held their breath. His footsteps felt too loud as he walked toward his study, each one echoing in the silence. And then, something else. A sound. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. It stopped him mid-step. His heart pounded, a beat too fast, too hard. His mind refused to process it at first, refused to acknowledge what his ears had already recognized. A noise he knew. A rhythm he couldn't mistake. He stood there, frozen. Just for a second. Just long enough for the weight of it to sink in. And then he moved. Down the hall. Past the framed wedding photos. Past the memories that once held meaning. Past the pieces of a life he had spent years building. His hand reached for the door. He pushed it open. And what he saw would never leave him. He didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He didn't demand answers or demand to know why. He just left. No words. No accusations. No anger spilling from his lips. Just quiet footsteps moving away from the wreckage of his life, down the hall, out the door, into the world that was still turning as if nothing had happened. As if everything hadn't just fallen apart. The drive back to the church felt unreal. His hands gripped the wheel, but he wasn't sure he was the one steering. His thoughts felt too loud, crashing against each other in a storm of disbelief, betrayal, confusion. The woman he had vowed to love. The woman who had stood beside him at the altar, who had promised faithfulness, who had whispered forever into his ear. And the man, someone from his own congregation. A man who had called him pastor. Who had sat in the pews, nodding along to sermons about honor, commitment, righteousness. His mind refused to settle. His faith told him to forgive. His heart told him to break. And somewhere in between, his soul stood at a crossroads, unable to move forward, unable to go back. Days passed. The house was no longer a home. It was a battleground of memories, a place where every object, every room, every scent reminded him of what had been lost. And then, Evelyn's confession. Tears in her eyes. A voice shaking with regret. She called it a mistake. A moment of weakness. She swore it hadn't meant anything. She begged for forgiveness. And Daniel. Daniel had spent his life teaching others about grace, about redemption, about the power of second chances. So he gave her one. He forgave her. Because that's what a man of God is supposed to do. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It is not the same as healing. And love, once broken, does not mend overnight. Here's where most stories would end, with a promise to rebuild, with a vow to move forward, with the kind of redemption people love to believe in. But Daniel's story? It was just beginning. He told himself that forgiveness meant moving forward. That if he just prayed hard enough, if he just believed enough, the pain would lessen. The memories would stop replaying. The bitterness would fade. But it didn't. Every morning, he woke up beside her, and something inside him recoiled. She would reach for his hand, whisper his name, search his eyes for the love that used to be there. But all she found was distance. An emptiness that deepened with each passing day. And then, Evelyn fell ill. At first, it was small things. A fever that wouldn't go away. A tiredness she couldn't shake. Then came the weight loss, the frailty, the way her voice grew weaker with every word she spoke. Doctors ran tests, but nothing made sense. No diagnosis, no explanation. Just a slow, steady decline that left her bedridden, dependent, helpless. He should have felt sorrow. He should have felt fear. He should have clung to her, prayed over her, begged God to make her whole again. But he didn't. Because deep down, a part of him wondered, was this justice? While she lay in that bed, skin pale, eyes hollow, voice barely above a whisper, Daniel found himself changing. The kindness, the warmth, gone. The man who had once built a life on faith and love now sat beside her, looking at a woman he no longer recognized. The once radiant woman, full of confidence, was now confined to bed, her body betraying her in ways she couldn't understand. But Daniel, he understood. He watched her suffer with quiet satisfaction, never saying a word. And then, when she was at her lowest, when she was too weak to fight back, too frail to do anything but watch, he made sure she saw everything. It started with small things. A lingering phone call. Soft laughter from the other room. Then, a lipstick-stained coffee cup left on the kitchen counter, a color Evelyn never wore. Then came the visits. At first, they were subtle. A woman from the church, a friend, offering support, sitting by Daniel's side at the dinner table. But the looks they exchanged were anything but innocent. The touch of her hand on his, the whisper in his ear, the way he smiled at her in a way Evelyn hadn't seen in years. Evelyn saw it. She saw all of it. And when she finally gathered the strength to ask, Daniel didn't even bother to lie. "I forgave you," he said, voice calm, steady. "Now you can forgive me." But it didn't stop there. The whispers in the hallway turned into open embraces. The casual visits turned into nights spent in their home. The woman, young, beautiful, untouched by sickness, didn't just take Evelyn's place in Daniel's heart. She took her place in their bed. And Evelyn, she could do nothing. Nothing but watch. She had destroyed their marriage with one reckless decision. Daniel made sure she paid for it, every single day afterward. He had spent weeks, months, drowning in the betrayal of the past. But in the end, it wasn't the memory of what Evelyn had done that haunted him the most. It was the reflection staring back at him in the mirror. Because the man who had once preached righteousness was now drowning in his own sins. Evelyn had lost everything. Her body was failing her, but that pain was nothing compared to the weight of what she had done. The home she once filled with warmth now felt cold. The man who once adored her barely looked at her anymore. And when he did, there was no love in his eyes, only obligation. She wanted to believe that time would heal them. That if she just held on, if she just showed him how sorry she was, maybe, just maybe, things would go back to the way they used to be. But deep down, she knew. There are some mistakes you can't undo. Some wounds that never close. And then, one night, as she lay in bed, too weak to move, she finally understood. It wasn't just her health that had abandoned her. It was him. Because Daniel was still preaching every Sunday. He was still standing in that pulpit, his voice steady, his words powerful. The congregation still admired him, still saw him as the man of faith they had always known. But they didn't know. They didn't see what she saw. The empty shell of a man who had given up on redemption. Because here's the truth. Sometimes, revenge doesn't bring closure. It only drags you deeper into the darkness. Evelyn had betrayed him once. But Daniel, he had betrayed himself. Daniel was still there. He was still the pastor, still the husband, still the man everyone believed him to be. But that man, the real man, had faded long ago. He stood beside Evelyn, just as a husband should. He cared for her when she was too weak to stand, spoke gently when the illness made her voice tremble. To everyone watching, it was devotion. A love that had survived the worst. A testament to the vows they had exchanged all those years ago. But love had nothing to do with it. It wasn't love that made him stay. It wasn't kindness, nor a longing to rebuild what they had lost. It was duty, obligation, the weight of a promise that no longer meant anything to him. He had given her forgiveness. He had told himself it was the right thing to do, that it was what God would want, that it was what he wanted. But peace, that was something he would never know again. Because when he looked at Evelyn, he didn't see the woman he had once cherished. He saw a stranger who had taken something from him that he could never get back. And when he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a man who had overcome. He saw a man who had been destroyed. Revenge had been easy. Letting go, that was impossible. And so, he stood. He preached. He smiled when the congregation praised his strength. But inside, Daniel was already gone. So now, I ask you, what would you have done? If you were Daniel, would you have forgiven her? Would you have walked away? Or would you have done what he did? Let the pain fester, let it grow into something else, something unrecognizable. And Evelyn, did she deserve the weight of her choices? Or was she just a woman who made a mistake, one that cost her everything? It's easy to say what should have happened. That Daniel should have let go, should have healed, should have found a way back to the man he used to be. But pain doesn't follow logic. Betrayal doesn't have a rule book. Sometimes, the scars left behind are worse than the wound itself. They don't fade. They don't soften. They become a part of you. And that's the real tragedy, isn't it? Because in the end, Daniel got his revenge. He had his justice. But did it bring him peace? Or did it turn him into something worse than the very thing he hated? Some wounds never truly heal. And sometimes, the person you become after betrayal is far worse than the one who betrayed you. Think about that. If this story made you think, if it pulled you in and left you questioning everything, you're exactly where you need to be. On Vic's True Crime Stories, we don't just tell stories. We uncover them. The twists, the betrayals, the chilling truths that most people would rather ignore. So if you want more stories that keep you on the edge, that make you question everything you thought you knew, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Because in the world of true crime, the truth is always stranger than fiction.